Before we start this episode, there has been something that has really been bothering me. The reality is, if you ask 10 health professionals the best way to treat PHT, you'll likely get 10 very different answers. But what if you had a personal AI system to ask any question and have its answers precisely match the philosophy of this podcast? This is now possible with my new AI assistant. Just ask it any question and it will scan all of my content, including my previous books, podcast episodes, online courses, and stored research papers to give you the best answer. In fact, every answer it gives is accompanied with clickable links to resources such as research papers and podcast episodes if you want to dive deeper. Curious about the best exercises and progressions based on the equipment you have available? Or maybe you have a flare-up and are looking to get back on track. Or maybe your sitting just isn't improving and you want to know if you need to make any adjustments. This AI system is trained to answer anything. This service is available through a monthly subscription, so you can try it risk-free and unsubscribe at any time. Click on the link in the show notes and watch the explainer video to learn more. Okay, on with the show. On today's episode, I'm answering all of your PHT questions. Welcome to the podcast that gives you the most up-to-date, evidence-based information on PHT rehab. My name is Brody, I am an online physio, but I've also managed to overcome my own battle with PHT in the past. And now I've made it my mission to give you all the resources you need to overcome this condition yourself. So with that, let's dive into today's episode. Thank you for joining me once again. We are finishing off answering these questions that have been submitted, and let's jump right in. The next question comes in from Nell, who says, "Hi Brody, I loved the interview with Keith Barr you released earlier this year. Very interesting. I would like to give his isometric protocol a go and was wondering how you would implement it for proximal hamstring tendinopathy. The idea I got from the podcast is that I should do 4 sets of 30-second holds with a 2-minute rest in between each hold. Keith Barr mentioned a specific bridge for the proximal hamstrings at around the 45-minute mark of the episode, but didn't quite understand what he meant. Could you please explain how to do the isometric glute bridge he was talking about?" I wasn't too familiar, so I went back to that episode and reviewed it. Yes, it is around the 47-minute mark, so thank you for helping me out with that. For those who aren't familiar or haven't listened to the episode with Keith Barr, highly recommended you go back and have a listen to that. He said for the first few weeks of a significant PHT, so he was talking about maybe an acute onset of a reactive, in the phase of an acute reactive tendinopathy. For the first few weeks, he would do 30-second hold, isometrics, keeping the pain level at about a 2 out of 10 pain. He then said to then progress, he would go to a single leg bridge and try to bias the high hamstring tendon a little bit with an anterior pelvic tilt. So if you aren't familiar, if you do go into a bridge position, so you lie on your back, you bend your knees, your feet are on the floor, and you just practice rotating your pelvis back and forth, still keeping everything on the floor. But if you roll your pelvis forward in this anterior pelvic tilt, you'll notice that the small of your back increases. But if you posteriorly pelvic tilt, you are almost digging your tailbone under and you're flattening your lower back, and your entire spine should go flat against the floor. That's a posterior pelvic tilt. When we anterior pelvic tilt and increase the amount of arch in our lower back, we're almost kind of winding up the proximal hamstring tendon as it attaches to the sit bone. It kind of wraps and tucks in behind the sit bone to then increase its tension. So Keith Barr was talking about once we get beyond this sort of acute phase and we want to start loading up the proximal hamstring tendon more, we might progress into a single leg bridge hold, isometric, but with this anterior pelvic tilt, with the theory of that being to load up the proximal hamstring tendon while also taking load or tension away from the glutes. So you're saying the glutes kind of, I don't want to say switch off, but are less prominent in that position, with the proximal hamstring tendon being more prominent. And so that might be a method to get better load applied to that area. And he said he would do that for 2 to 4 weeks and then increase yet again, progressing into something that's more dynamic load, something like lighter deadlifts or other things like that, and then progress then again to something of plyometrics if returning to explosive speed is something that interests you in your rehab journey. So hopefully that helped clear that up for you now. I know posterior pelvic tilts and pelvic tilts in general was probably some terminology and slang that just escaped me. I tried to make sure that if any guests that I have answer a question with a bit of jargon, I like to clarify it as much as I can, keeping in mind that the audience that listen don't really have a medical background. And so I'm sorry that one slipped by and made it a bit confusing. Okay, we have our next question coming in from Cam, who says, "Hi Brody, what is your advice for building a recovery routine without deadlifts? I have a knee issue that is aggravated by even unweighted deadlifts. Thank you for your help." Happy to help, Cam. I would say, okay, first and foremost, let's rehab the knee. Let's focus on the knee. I don't know exactly what the diagnosis is. You just say that you have a knee issue. So we want to try to start doing the right exercises or the right rehab to better improve the knee so that you can start doing your deadlifts, because it is one of the most important. But also if we're doing bridges or curls or weighted step-ups and the other essential exercises for PHT, that's going to load up the knee as well. And so it's very hard to rehab a tendon that's around the hamstring area without bending the knee. So yes, we can then prioritize the knee if we wanted to, but you could just try reducing the range of movement for your deadlifts. I don't know if full range of movement deadlifts is what the onset of knee pain is like, but what happens if we reduce the amount of range for your deadlift? Does that trigger the onset of knee pain? Because if it doesn't, I would go just short of what triggers knee pain and then load you up in that position so that the proximal hamstring tendon is still getting the load, still getting the benefit of the deadlift, yet not aggravating the knee. And who knows, maybe if you are doing less range of movement, that might give you more permission or more success with loading it up heavier. That's something we could gradually work on and experiment with to see if that's successful for you. But in saying that, like, again, I don't know the diagnosis of the knee, but when it comes to a deadlift, try to make sure with the deadlift technique that your shins, your tibia bone, remains vertical, because if it does, there's not a lot of load that goes through the knee. If it is patellofemoral pain, which is the most common pathology of the knee, range, there'll be maybe a certain range that creates that onset of pain. But unlike a squat or a step up or a lunge, the deadlift doesn't really go through a large range of movement, and the knee doesn't pass the toes, which steeply builds up the load that goes through the knee joint. So if you can just make sure the tibia remains vertical during your deadlift, I would just want to make sure that that's achieved, because if you're saying that you've got knee pain with your deadlifts, but then you do a deadlift and the knee travels slightly forward beyond the toes and the shins aren't remaining vertical, that could just be a simple change that we make that allows you to successfully do the deadlifts without knee pain. So we just want to clear that first, and then if it's still painful with the knee, play around with the ranges of movement and that sort of stuff. So I hope that answers your question. Anyone else who says I can't do a deadlift because of they don't have access to the weights, typically the replacement that I would do would be a Nordic hip dip. Tends to mimic the deadlift to the best of its ability that I can think of, which is, you hook your ankles underneath something. If people are familiar with the classic Nordic drop, this time with a Nordic hip dip, we are keeping our thighs vertical and just dipping at the hips. However, I can't suggest that for you, Cam, because that would aggravate the knee as well, because it's pretty aggressive in terms of its kneeling position. So unfortunately, I couldn't help you out with that, but hopefully that answer helps. We have another one coming in from Michelle, who says, can those with partial tears or very diseased tendons ever be rehabbed, or will there always be pain or need surgery? Heated topic. Where do I start with this? It's very hard to know how significant a tear is. If someone has a scan and has identified a tear, I would definitely want to know the onset of symptoms of the tear. I'm assuming you've had scans and it's shown tears, but there's like, if you scan the healthy population, they'll show tears, they'll show fraying of tendons. Like, depending on your age, it can be a normal part of a human. So we do want to be very careful with interpreting those things. Also, like the orientation of it, like you might find that some partial tears are actually like longitudinal, like along the tendon itself, which in theory will be less problematic because it's in the same direction that load is being applied. However, if the tear was horizontal and load is being applied perpendicular to the horizontal tear, that could obviously be a bit more risky. But like I say, partial tears are in the healthy population anyway. And why I talk about I want to know the onset is that if you were sprinting up a hill and then you felt a ping in your high hamstring and then you had these scans and it shows a significant tear, that is very different from someone who has a gradual onset. Typically with PHT, they're training for a marathon or they're just incorporating some speed work, and it's a very gradual onset, starting with maybe some tightness, some mild soreness that just got worse and worse and worse, and then it permeated into sitting, and then it permeated into even walking and those sorts of things. That gradual onset that then gets a scan and shows a tear would lead me a little bit more skeptical or having less relevance to that finding, in which we would just treat it like a tendinopathy. There are significant tears though. I don't want to dismiss the significant tears. You can have an avulsion fracture, which is the tendon pulling away from the bone, and with, very traumatic sudden instances like doing the splits, like it can significantly disrupt the function and may require surgery. Typical criteria for it is if a tear impacts all three tendons, if there's 2 or more centimeters of retraction with the tendon pulling away from the bone, and if you're encountering very limited function, unable to walk, unable to straighten the leg or bring the leg behind you, definitely you would be a candidate, or at least having a review or a talk with a surgeon to see if surgery is likely for you. But if it's less significant and it is that gradual onset and you have shown some tears, partial tears in your scans, I would just be considering within your rehab to just focus on strength and function and return to activity. Focus on your symptoms, focus on strength, focus on function. What do I mean by that? Like throughout your rehab, are your symptoms getting better? Are you getting stronger? Are you slowly returning back to the tasks that you want to return back to? If you are on that trend, I would focus more on that rather than focusing on, is my tear healing? Is my tendon improving physically? Like the physical properties, is it improving? It's less of a priority because we could have you in less pain, more function, back to pain-free running, back to cycling symptom-free. We scan you 5 years later and there's still some small tears there, yet you've been symptom-free for years. How much do we really worry about it? I wouldn't worry about it at all if that was the scenario we're presented with. As a loyal listener of the podcast, I've got a free gift for you. If you're still struggling with your hamstring rehab or wondering if you're even treating the right injury, I've created a free PHT roadmap to give you instant clarity and direction. It starts with a simple PDF checklist to see if your symptoms actually align with proximal hamstring tendinopathy, including 2 crucial diagnostic tests you can do on your own at home. This helps you to decide whether to double down on PHT rehab or head in a different direction. Once you've completed the guide, you'll unlock access to a private video where I walk you through my step-by-step rehab formula based on the latest tendon research most health professionals haven't caught up with yet. Still have questions after watching the video? That's fine. You'll also have the option to book a free injury chat with me to troubleshoot your rehab plan and tailor it to your situation. Just a heads up, this resource won't be available forever. So look for the free PHT roadmap in the show notes, click on the link and follow the roadmap from there. Michelle, you also asked about like very diseased tendons. Is that worth Will they ever be rehabbed? Yes, there is the potential for the most diseased tendons to revert back to healthy tendons if rehabbed the right way. Like I mentioned, there's an earlier episode with Keith Barr, and I since created a subsequent episode reviewing one of Keith Barr's publications where he went through a case study. He had one of the most diseased tendons. He had an NBA player who had 50% of his patellar tendon in a degenerative state in the central portion of that tendon. So we're looking at a large portion of the tendon undergoing the most severe stages of tendinopathy in the worst possible position within that tendon. So not a lot of things going for this NBA player. However, with the protocol that Keith Barr discusses, managed to have this athlete still staying in season, still completing an entire season of NBA, along with some protocols around vitamin C and some other supplements around collagen, some particular specified loading strategies, and in 18-month follow-up, had an MRI, the tendon itself was considered completely healed. So there's some data to show that it is in fact possible. Charlotte says, should we do our rehab strength sessions if flared up, or do we wait to get back to baseline? Flare-up questions are always tricky to answer because every flare-up is different. We do have mild, moderate, severe flare-ups. I have done a previous episode on planning a flare-up, coming up with your flare-up plan, where I do talk through a potential moderate, potential mild, potential severe flare-up and what that looks like in terms of decision making. But in most cases, if you do encounter a flare-up and you've progressed something and it's led to an increase in symptoms for a couple of days, I would say in most cases, 1 to 3 days of rest might be appropriate. But then thereafter, we are then finding your new adaptation zone. We'll give it 1 to 3 days to settle down, not back to baseline, doesn't need to get back to baseline, but just enough to settle things down somewhat. And then we are finding, okay, what can I tolerate now? That might be readjusting your deadlifts. That might be changing and reducing the range of movement. That might be shortening your runs, reducing your speed work, and just seeing how symptoms behave from there. And if symptoms behave okay, then we're making that gradual build up back to where you were pre-flare up. That's essentially the principles that are involved. Like, I'm going through this at the moment, as I mentioned, I think maybe last episode or the episode before. I'm managing this knee issue, which was brought on by doing a long run and then playing pretty competitively with basketball that night. And the combination of those two really flared it up. I have since, it settled down to when I was symptom-free running. I think I ran about 4K or 5K, and that didn't increase my symptoms. So I'm like, okay, let me try basketball again because I do love it. But I returned to basketball playing for about 45 minutes and at about 50% intensity. And I told myself, these are the restrictions I'm going to follow. And if I'm flared up afterwards, hey, that's the experiment I went with. But I didn't want to get too carried away, be really flared up and be like, damn, and sort of beat myself up. It was just an experiment that I wanted to try. Went at 50% intensity, flared up slightly. It was really sore that night, really sore the next morning, but actually bounced back a lot quicker than I thought. And so I thought, oh, this isn't as bad. I took maybe 1 or 2 rest days after that. So that follows the 1 to 3 rest days that I said before. I then went back to strength training, did my squats, did my lunges. That was fine. So experimenting again, worked out that was okay. Then I did a 3.5K run. I took my daughter in the running pram to a park, just trying to squeeze in some exercise when I can with my busy parent schedule. So ran to a park for about 2K, and then ran home after the park about 1.5 K, and that was okay. I handled that really well. And so I'm like, great, let me try something else. So yesterday I tried 2.5 Ks on the treadmill and accompanied with some high rocks movements. So I did like a sled push and I did 150 wall balls, and that slightly flared me up. I reduced my range of movement with my wall balls, but squats and lunges and everything had been fine up until that point, so I thought I was okay. Bit sore for the remainder of the day, but I would say slightly above baseline the next morning. Continuously experimenting. I feel like I'm in a really good space at the moment because I'm doing a lot more and it's tolerating a lot more. I think basketball needs to take a little bit of a backseat for now. I don't really want to take on that risk because I'm really enjoying the workouts that I'm doing with my high rocks stuff at home and the amount of running that I'm doing. So now with previous experiments with basketball not successful, I've decided to maybe give it several weeks off and not risk it. But this is what we do. We constantly experiment. How does this sound? How does this sound? Does this sound sensible? Does this progression sound sensible? How do I feel the next day? Like I'm in the throes of that at the moment. I encourage you to do the same if you're managing flare-ups and just trying to get things under control. Charlie has a question who says, of the 4 exercises I do, I can still progress them, but what happens when I can no longer progress when I get close to my max? Also, as I progress, should I do fewer sessions at this point? A session once a week rather than 3 times a week? Also, is there any benefit in switching any of the 4 exercises, or is it just as good to stick with the 4 exercises I've been doing for the last 6 months? Thank you so much on making the podcast and course on PHT. I felt very hopeless before finding your work, which has got my leg to 90% in terms of being back to normal, which means I can now do what I wish after 6 years of making no progress and also giving up hope it would ever heal. Congratulations on your success, Charlie. I thought I'd just include that bit at the end just to help other people who may be going through similar frustrations. But back to your question. If you feel like you're progressing to you're reaching your limit, you're reaching your max, you can still progress. However, the progressions get smaller and less often, I would say. Think of like a bodybuilder or like a Olympic weightlifter. They're constantly like pushing their max, but they're going through these periodized training where they're slowly trying to squeeze out 5 pounds here, 5 pounds there, 1 pound, 1 pound, 1 pound, just to try to, see gains. And you will see those gains, but when we do reach close to our max, the rate of progression plateaus out. So for example, for an exercise, let's say we're doing 3 sets of 6, 100 pounds. We'll say 100 just to keep nice, clear, and help follow along with this. So let's say we're doing 3 sets of 6, 100 pounds. Your next progression could be, okay, let me do 2 sets of 6 at my usual 100 pounds. But then for my third set, let me do 1 set of 4 at 102 pounds. It's reducing the reps a little bit, but it's increasing the weight a little bit. I would say it's still a progression. And if that's handled, maybe we do 1 set of, the last set is now 5 reps, then the last set is now 6 reps. And then maybe we do 2 sets of that. Then maybe we do 3 sets of that. And eventually after 7 progressions, we have now progressed from 100 pounds to 102 pounds. Sounds like tedious, but any progress is progress. Some of my exercises that I do in the gym, I'm, approaching my max and my reps are exactly the same. I have all my reps written down in my sheet. So I'll be like, what did I do last time? How challenging was it? How sore was I after that? Do I keep it that same weight, or have I been doing the same for several weeks and been handling it okay? Let me try the next smallest progression. And that's where I'm at for a lot of my exercises. And I might progress once every 3 weeks. But if I'm consistent enough and I continuously progress, in 6 months' time, I'm significantly stronger than where I was prior. So hopefully that makes sense. In terms of the frequency of the exercises, if you're doing it 3 times a week and you're close to your max, definitely reduce it because we're now getting to the point where if you're doing it like every second day or close to every second day, you're not going to get enough recovery in between those sessions to make the gains. And you might find that if you drop from 3 sessions per week to 2 sessions per week, all of a sudden you're feeling fresher in the gym, you're feeling like you can lift heavier, and then you can progress to the next step. So I would recommend making that adjustment. For most muscle groups, training twice a week is a good one. If you want to hit like a maintenance phase, maybe you're into your marathon training and there's a block of training where it's like high volume running and you just want to maintain the strength that you've gained in the gym, you can temporarily back it off to once a week. That would be totally fine to do. The other part of the question about, do I switch out these exercises? If you like the 4 exercises, I guess you could switch out the exercises if you're bored of the exercises or you just dislike them. Some people hate a certain exercise and some people are getting really bored of a certain exercise. You can switch it out to have it look somewhat different and to sort of keep motivation high. But if you're okay with doing the exercises and they're suiting the goals that you're working towards, keep them. If they're not suiting your goals, or if your goals change and you need to meet different demands, then yes, we would shift the exercises to match your goals. But if they're on track to meet your goals and you're not bored of them, just keep the 4 exercises. A lot of people talk about this, keeping the body guessing and keep it adapting to different things. But if you're constantly switching it out, it's hard to see consistency. It's hard to see progress that's being made. And I think you're better off sticking with consistency and similar exercises if they're meeting your goals. Last question we have comes in from Alicia, who says, recently I've begun having a flare-up and I'm wondering if walking a mile a day on our treadmill has done it. It's similar to walking up a slight hill. The treadmill is a true form trainer treadmill. I began walking daily in March. I didn't ease into it, I guess. My question is, could my daily treadmill walking have caused a flare-up? And should I introduce walking gradually? I've been continuing to do my PHT exercises all this time. Okay, thanks for your question, Alicia. I would say walking has particular low load on the hamstring. It is a low loaded hamstring exercise. If you start walking uphill, that's slightly more load, I would say, or slightly more compression. If you are walking faster and faster and faster, that is more and more and more load on the hamstring because the swing phase becomes a little bit more pace involved. And as we know from running, talking about previous episodes, it's the swing phase or the late swing phase that's the highest demand of the hamstring. And so when you start walking faster, you start swinging your legs a bit more, and so the load starts to build. And so I guess speed would have a component to this as well. With that said, could walking exceed the capacity and cause a flare-up? Yes, it could. It could be a low load, high volume situation. And maybe on the back of that, maybe a lack of recovery. I'm not sure, because if you're doing it daily, maybe your body's struggling to catch up with the load placed on the hamstring and the inability to recover in that time before you do another bout of walking. So again, speed would be a factor in this, but if it's a low load exercise, typically it's okay. But if you've done too much and your body's struggled to accumulate that recovery, you might start seeing the load or stress or strain on the hamstring just starts accumulating because of the lack of recovery to adapt. So if all other variables were consistent around this time of the flare-up, the treadmill was the only change, and you didn't really necessarily have a gradual introduction, I'd say it's a likely cause that the treadmill has caused the flare-up. But you can test. Try temporarily backing off. Do your 1 mile walk on the treadmill every second day, or just have like 2 or 3 days off and see if that improves your flare-up symptoms. And if it does, maybe it is the walking. And if it isn't, then maybe there's something else going on within your day-to-day that is causing the flare-up. We continue experimenting. But maybe it's worth experimenting with the speed as well. Maybe with the incline, if there is an incline on the treadmill. Maybe every second day you just walk slower on the treadmill and see if that's enough balance to put recovery back into it. But you can continue experimenting. Hopefully that helped. Hopefully all these answers has helped your better understanding of rehab and PHT as a whole. And as I sign off, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode. If you are looking for more PHT resources, then check out my website link in the show notes. There you will find my free PHT 5-day course, other online content, and ways you can personally connect with me, including a free 20-minute injury chat to discuss your current rehab and any tweaks you might need to make. Well done for taking an active role in your rehab by listening to content like this, and together we can start ticking off all of your rehab goals and finally overcome your PHT.